I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange.
Hey there, spooky nerds. Welcome back to Talking Strange. I'm Aaron Sagers, and if you're watching this on the video version, you're going to see that, I have this blue green screen behind me, and it looks a little bit different, even though a lot of times I use a blue green screen. It's just, I'm in a different location. I'm on some spooky travels for work and covering up the background a little bit and also recording in a different spot. So hopefully the audio on this sounds okay. But I want to, before I get to my guest today, let's do a little bit of a background. Okay, who remembers the original Witchboard movie? It debuted in December 1986. That was in selected theaters and then went wide release in 87. So we're talking about 40 years ago. And director and writer Kevin Tenney, he, who I've met, is a very lovely guy at Michigan Paracon. So he made his mark by being really the first to cast the Ouija board as a main character, essentially, in a movie. We had seen the boards before, but the movie really inspired research amongst a lot of Ouija experts, including Bob Murch, who's been on this show, the chairman of the board, of the Talking Board Historic Society, and inspired folks to really learn more about the Ouija board. And Witchboard really successfully, skillfully mixed urban legends and superstitions and really created a lot of what we call Ouija-stitions. Prior to Witchboard, the original Witchboard, only The Exorcist could really rival what the impact on Ouija and its perception in pop culture. I have a lot of thoughts about Ouija boards. I don't think they're evil or bad. I think they're just a board. It's sort of what you do with it and what your intent is that matters. But really, The Exorcist and then Witchboard made people freaked the hell out about Ouija boards to the point that I go to paranormal events and, I at some of these events, I sign and sell a tiki themed inspired Ouija board that I designed, and people will walk away and say, no, thank you. And I love talking to people about Ouija board and their reluctance about it. So, I mean, if you're afraid to place your hands on a Ouija planchette and let the spirit move you, have you ever heard that Ouija is a combination of the French word for yes, oui, and then the German word for yes, ja, hence Ouija. Or if you've heard about playing with the Ouija board by yourself, you risk falling into a progressive entrapment, or that Ouija boards date back to 540 BC and were used by Pythagoras. All those things. Really, you can attribute a lot of that to Witchboard. It's a huge mark on pop culture and really cast the board as this villain. Okay, so that's Witchboard, the 1986-87 film. Now let's also look at horror writer, filmmaker Chuck Russell. Now Chuck Russell, this guy, he's been on Talking Strange a couple times before, for instance, to talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, which he directed. That 1987 film, which came out the same year that Witchboard received wide release, it did wonders for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, really pushed the character Freddy Krueger into a new direction. We had more humor that was introduced for Freddy, and we also took him out of the sweater and gave him different costumes, such as his tuxedo outfit, things like that. So, big success of a movie. Still, I think, probably the best Nightmare on Elm Street film. And then Chuck Russell went on to direct the remake of The Blob in 1988. That was a success. He did The Mask, starring Jim Carrey in 94. Huge success, as well as then doing the popular movies, very successful, financially successful movies, Eraser with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then The Scorpion King with Dwayne The Rock Johnson in 2002. So Chuck Russell, this guy has a track record, a Hollywood track record of success. My first exposure before I knew who Chuck Russell was when I was a little kid. In 1984, there was the film called Dreamscape, which featured the two icons, Max von Sydow and Christopher Plummer. That movie freaked me out. It's about a psychic and people invading dreams. There was a lizard guy in it. Freaked me out. I love it as a result. So Chuck Russell is a gifted filmmaker, and he is now returning to the horror genre in a big way with not a remake and not really a reboot, but his take on Witchboard. Now, this film, the synopsis for it, which Chuck did write on the screenplay and he's directing, the synopsis for this is that a cursed witchboard awakens dark forces, dragging a young couple into a deadly game of possession, deception, and supernatural terror in New Orleans. And it's instead of a Ouija board, we're dealing with a pendulum board. And Chuck introduces a whole new canon, legacy, mythology, and an installment in Witchboard. And I love what A24 and Neon are doing on the horror front. And there's a lot of deep, insightful horror, elevated horror, as some people call it. And Witchboard 2025, it's just fun, straightforward, entertaining horror with some great gore and bloody scenes and some just scenery chewing, and it's just a lot of fun. And it's I got a kick out of it. It felt like a movie that, and I say this in such a complimentary way, a movie that I would have watched as uh, picking up a VHS tape out of a video rental store in the 80s and 90s. And that's why I like Witchboard, that was written and directed by Chuck Russell. So you'll have the opportunity to see Witchboard when it opens in theaters on August 15th. So to talk about the new Witchboard, we have Chuck Russell. And what I really dug about this interview is that Chuck is not just a guy that knows horror, loves horror. He's also a guy that's into the spooky stuff. He talks about his spiritual beliefs as well as his own opinions on things like Ouija boards, on the supernatural, and his research that he's done into this. So Chuck, I mean, look, a director approaching a topic and not having any kind of personal investment in it, that's cool. I love that. You don't have to be a somebody that's into the paranormal to write and direct a great ghost story, a great paranormal pop culture installment. But it's extra cool when you are. And that is the case with Chuck, who has opinions about all this stuff. So I've been yammering for a bit. Let's get to it. Here's my interview with Chuck Russell from the new movie Witchboard, Witchboard 2025. Chuck, so great to talk with you again, my friend. And I'm excited now because I think when we first talked about this movie, it was 2 years ago at San Diego Comic-Con. And you could talk a little bit about it, but not much really because I think you were still working on it at that point, right?
No, definitely was. At Comic-Con, we just finished production, and I was just beginning my edit of the film. And now you only recently do you have the final edit and all the visual effects perfectly done and a wonderful score by Sam Ewing. So I'm really happy with the result.
Did the final result change a whole lot in the editing room? Was there kind of certain beats in this movie, this story that you decided to highlight a little bit more, or anything that you had to kill some darlings that had to end up on the editing room floor?
Well said. We always have to kill our darlings. There's things that I might be interested in, and I never know ultimately the whole bounce, the whole spectrum of the responses from the audience. And I do films that are kind of a balance. The number one, it has to be terrifying, and I'm happy to say that the film will scare the hell out of you. Um, but I'm really interested in character. I believe films are much more frightening if we care about the characters and if the story's deep. And we do have that, but getting that balance just right, I finally got to the tighter cut that really works of the film after a couple of preview screenings. Well, we had a great response, but I could just tell, you can tell when you're sitting in the audience, you know. My audience is getting restless, you know, at this point, and I've got to keep them on the edge of their seats. So the final version really has a great pace.
Yeah, kind of on that note, it's curious for me to think about the audience and how the audience has changed because when you first got into this game, first off, this was not in an era of streaming or smartphones or anything. So the distraction, the temptation to be distracted, it was nil pretty much. How have you noticed now doing these test audiences, how have audiences changed? Do you have to do a little bit more to kind of keep them on the hook and uh, kind of avoid that temptation for them reaching for that phone or whatever?
Well, it so happens I've always had a short attention span myself, which might be why my first couple of films were pretty successful in the horror genre. I'm impatient with films. So I believe in suspense, of course, and I believe in setting up characters, but I naturally lean towards that anyway, and naturally lean towards big visuals. It's why I've never done a straight up guy with a knife slasher film. While Halloween kind of knocked the ball out of the park completely. Kudos to John Carpenter for all his brilliant work. Halloween obviously had a few supernatural touches as well, so it was imaginative. But I'm only interested in uh, really stretching my imagination. So the films I've done often include transitions to different states of reality, in particular dreams. I find it mind-blowing that you can walk down the street and every sort of person might be walking by you, but at night we all drop into this dreamscape, literally of God knows what. And whether it was a good or bad dream, you wake up and have your coffee and go into your day like nothing happened. I find that whatever that device is, it is an amazing part of being a human being and helps us learn how to dream and hope and deal with our fears in real life.
The film definitely has some scares to it, but it's also it's a fun flick. And as I was watching it, even though I love that we have sort of the A24s and the neons out there that are kind of aiming for the prestige horror. I was watching this and I felt a little bit like I was transported back to me being a much younger moviegoer in the 80s watching horror flicks. And I wanted to kind of get your take on that about that intentionality behind it. And also, people are going to say this is Chuck's return to horror, but I mean, how do you feel about that? So kind of a two-parter there.
No, I agree. It is definitely my return to horror. And one of the reasons I took this long is I wanted to do something that I had taught myself in the effects and in the characterizations in the story itself. And it wasn't until the Witchboard property was available to me and I realized, you know, here's another great pop icon, piece of pop culture, really. Because Kevin Tenney did the original, really started the, if you call it a genre, the Ouija board movies. But I wanted to do a movie about a pendulum board anyway, which was the predecessor to Ouija boards. So I thought I could combine these ideas and go deep into Wicca, go deep into an antagonist and learning why back in the day she was a witch and what happened to her to put her in a state of revenge so extreme that it affected her spirit in this way. So look, those were the things I wanted to play with. I finally felt, well, I've got something I think I can make more entertaining than my other films in the genre.
On that note, I do recall when we first talked about this, I saw just a small little clip of a trailer and you had mentioned your own interest in pendulum boards. And I'm familiar with pendulum boards and I actually have quite a few Ouija boards as a bit of a collector. Talk about that interest, your own personal interest in pendulum boards and the supernatural elements and even maybe some of the potential history that feeds into the fiction of Witchboard 2025.
The if what we did is resonant, and I think it is, it's because we based everything on actual historical facts about Wicca and what was happening in France, and the whole pendulum board thing is based on history. They go back to ancient Egypt. If you're familiar with it, it's fascinating. And these were used more for spell casting. It's not just letters; it's astrological signs and ancient symbols. And I really got into designing this board, making sure there was a good side as well as an evil side. I don't like just pentagrams and it's kind of on the nose to say it's the devil's board or something. It can be used for evil, maybe it can be used for good, and that's what white witches believe they're doing in Wicca. I find it a dangerous gateway to darker trouble. It's a cautionary tale against becoming obsessed with the occult, which Madison Eisman's character does in this film. So I have a great respect. I don't own a Ouija board because I so believe I'm a coward. I believe in the spiritual world. I don't want to accidentally summon anything, and I align myself with God when I'm faced with darkness. So I try to do this responsibly, if that word's appropriate, because I've seen my films played all over the world. So I like dramatizing darkness if I keep an element of hope. And the horror genre should not have happy endings. That's not what I'm saying. It costs the protagonists dearly to face an evil like that.
Hmm.
But I also believe it can be imaginative and entertaining, and that's what we've done with Witchboard.
I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school, and then, I'm a researcher of not just a journalist and a nerdy journalist, but also a researcher of spooky things, lore, legends, and more from the perspective of what does this say about us? It's kind of up to other people to decide what they want to believe or not about that. But I think a lot of that was formed by me being a Catholic kid, watching Witchboard, watching The Exorcist and The Omen and all those great flicks. Do you approach this from some sort of religious philosophy or background? You've said spiritual, but were you formed by some sort of religious upbringing?
I was raised in the Catholic Church at a dark time in the Catholic schools. And we were sitting through Latin masses. I was very uncomfortable. I lived in a Jewish neighborhood in Chicago. All my friends were Jewish. And as soon as the nuns said, well, they're going to hell if they're not Catholic, I was out, even at 8 years old. So I believe in God. So in general, I suppose you could say I'm Christian and proud of it. But the fact is, I also believe in the devil is quite a real element, and spiritual evil is quite a real element, and what it does to men. So I'm fascinated with dramatizing that. So I do it in a way carefully that I feel responsible, because these messages go out in films all around the world. So I believe in dramatizing the dark if I can also dramatize there's a force of light as well.
Sure.
And that's part of why I think people are walking away telling me the film's entertaining. It's fast-paced, it's fun, the visuals are wild. We have a gorgeous, very talented cast. So it's a fun world to visit if you want to scare.
I don't know if you've come across a gentleman by the name of Bob Murch, but he's kind of an expert in Ouija boards and talking boards. And he's documented sort of the evolution of sort of the rules, the lore around Ouija boards, Ouija stitions, as he calls them. And Kevin Tenney in the original Witchboard was great as far as introducing these rules in pop culture that then people started taking away that it was a real rule, and that's great storytelling. What are some of the rules, the lore, the fictional lore that you have introduced with your Witchboard that you think kind of might take root, as it were?
We have a little demo scene at the beginning of the film where Mel Johnson, who's an amazing Australian actress and a relatively new star, explains to our lead Madison Eisman what it is and how to use it, and it starts with intention. And I think any of these mystical things should start that way. If you have a good intention, you're protected, in my opinion. And if you're kind of a dark sider, well, you're on your own and you have to face your own karma. So I think the spiritual world is a dangerous door to open, which is exactly what Mel says. I feel this is a cautionary tale, but I think everything we do with human intention is a form of magic. We're creating magic in our lives, whether it's you're designing an athletic shoe or doing something creative in your own work, or whether you're doing cinema the way we do, we're manifesting. So what's your intention? Hopefully you have a good intention with the things you manifest in your life.
But with the story is of this witch who her origins are talked about in the film. I don't want to spoil anything, but we know she didn't start out the way she ends up. And is do you view the witch, the Wiccan approach, as sort of the antagonist here, or is it more of the organized religion, the forces of that perhaps are persecuting people? Who do you view as like
I,
the
I,
evil
I'm not
here?
I'm not pretentious enough to comment on any religion, including Wicca and Christianity, everything. So for me, it's about this particular character,
Yeah,
who is Naga Soth, we represent as the Queen of Witches, who's based on real historical facts about witches. The French Pope, this is a fact, in the 1700s outlawed pendulum boards. They were used for spell casting. They were used to raise spirits, I suppose, like Ouija boards are, but for much more. They're not really letters and numbers. They're astrological signs. They're ancient symbols. And there is, scientists will tell you this whole action with the pendulum could be your own subconscious mind
right.
with micromotor. I've read all about this. So scientists have experts,
Idiomatic, I believe, is the term. Like, yeah,
and mystics will tell you no, it's really the spiritual world. I think tarot, Ouija boards, and things like pendulum boards you are using your subconscious. You may be meeting it halfway to a spiritual influence, so be careful. Um, I don't recommend it, but there's a reason these things have worked and were popular for centuries. So when the French Pope outlawed them, he was burning women at the stake for having them, which is why they disappeared and most people don't know about them. And after that, the Ouija board evolved.
yeah. The I I did enjoy seeing you talk about referencing sort of the witch trials in France because our homegrown Salem stories is what kind of dominates the spotlight. But all throughout Europe and then much earlier, there was werewolf trials and witch trials and all these things, persecutions of people that may have been mentally ill or just for the fact that they were women, they were being persecuted. Um, but because you bring this up, it's kind of becomes like this trope with publicity tours when you're talking about a movie that has supernatural elements, and it goes back to um, The Omen and The Exorcists. But people are like, did anything strange happen on set? It's interesting to ask you because you do have your own beliefs and philosophies about this spiritual world. So, did you do undergo any kind of protective ritual or blessing on set? And did anything strange happen on set? I feel like it's a better question for you than as opposed to some director that just knows they have to tell a juicy story to get the clickbait headlines.
Look, for me, it's a pretty personal question, and I don't impose it on the crews, you
Right.
know. But I always privately tell my cast members ever since Elm Street 3 that at the end of the day, if we're going to focus on evil or particularly forms of possession, that at the end of a workday, I feel comfortable driving their performance into a place that I think is authentic. But at the end of the day, I want them to take at least 5 minutes in their trailer in a private space to meditate on what's good to them, what's powerful to them. It might be something your grandfather gave you, or it might be a Christian cross, or it might be something else. But where's your positive power? Uh, how do you reach to the light side? And I ask them all to please meditate on that, on the scene after a day's work on scenes that are really draining or focused on the dark side. So look, I think acting is evocative and manifesting. I think there is a real spiritual world. I've researched talking to people that their personal stories are very, very scary. Some of them influenced this film. Um, so I think it's a real thing, and I think people need to honor that it is a spiritual world in their own lives, and be cautious and take comfort that the good side is way more powerful than the dark side. The dark side requires your obsession, right? So if you're not obsessed, and I use drugs as a metaphor with Madison Eisman's character, it's a similar obsession, in my belief, to a drug obsession that leads you into an addiction or an obsession with the occult that leads you to a dark side.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that this story would be fascinating even without the actual supernatural elements because people get obsessed with these. For me, I'm thinking of the Twilight Zone episode with Shatner, and then the fortune telling box in the diner. It doesn't matter whether there's a supernatural element or not, as far as the story goes, because it's humans that get so caught up in their own
Correct.
obsession and
It's
addiction.
almost beside the point because the human spirit is so powerful. If you're going to focus on evil, then you don't need a literal devil necessarily.
Yeah. Did you, but still, there's these theories that when you are conducting rituals on camera, even if you're just mimicking them, that the other side might still take it seriously, that you might actually be inviting something in. So, was there any peculiar things happening on set?
Yes, but know that the I designed the board personally, and while some of the entities on the board, they're like tarot basically. They
Mhm.
can interpret it as good or evil. Kali is a god of destruction, but also a god of rebirth. So there's two sides of these things. And I was very cautious to make a board that I could present to an international audience, and it would be safe, and that we wouldn't necessarily pop any real entities into my cast. So in my own way, I used ancient symbiology that there's a safety on those,
Yeah.
that I'm comfortable with. Um, so I'm confident. But however, we were shooting in buildings that really were over 300 years old, and there's a dungeon sequence with a place that really had it was an old fort out on the outskirts of Montreal, and plenty of bad things had happened there. So I find myself doing notes as the crew leaves. I'm doing my shots for the next day, and it's usually just me and a couple of people cleaning up. And I realized I don't want to be in this spot alone with me and a flashlight on my notebook. You can feel an oppression because that was underground, that set, partially underground. And there are places that in the woods. We found the most frightening possible witchy woods outside of Montreal, and they had a history as well. Um, so as I was scouting those woods, I got separated from the crew as directors sometimes do. Not smart, but you're looking for that perfect tree. And I realized I didn't know exactly where the crew was, and I had a little rush back from childhood of being lost in the dark woods. So we're evoking things. I'm personally cautious, but there's something about doing horror films that I think it works well that I'm basically a coward, and I know what scares me, and I'm happy to use it on the audience.
I love that. And I agree. I think I've been spent a lot of times in some creepy locations for the other parts of my job. Um there's safety in numbers and there's also the old
Oh,
expression about
I've had this in
yeah,
locations where it wasn't a horror film, but
yeah.
an empty mansion, sometimes it has a history. You can feel it.
Yeah. It's it is palpable and when you're there alone, there's that vibe shift where you're just like, maybe I shouldn't be here alone
I get
anymore.
I get over focused on this film, and suddenly, okay, I'm alone in a in a building that's been around since the 1700s, and horrible things have happened in this part of the fort. What am I thinking? So
Yeah.
I'm cautious for myself as well.
The board itself, uh, take me through like sort of the construction of the board because it's a gorgeous looking board. It's one of those things that I'm like, I would now like to purchase a replica of that. The what you were working with on set, what was the weight of this thing? What was it made of? How
I have it
many you
right
had?
over. It's in my office somewhere, but the that's a real wooden board. It was handcrafted, and we really didn't have a good double for a while. Halfway through the show, I finally got a double in case something happened to the original. But it's heavy. It's real wood. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the board does certain things that the real board does, and that had to be crafted. So it was really important to design the symbiogy for me, and then to make it look authentically distressed and ancient. And I got to tell you, it's the best prop I've had to work with since The Mask, and very very purposefully similar to The Mask, in that there is one magical prop. It's like the Maltese Falcon. It's what Hitchcock used to call a MacGuffin
A
movie,
MacGuffin.
where the prop drives the action. Witchboard is a game, it's a puzzle, it's a dangerous portal, and it is fascinating. And I've had exactly that comment come back to me. I feel we did our job because I've heard that's fascinating a couple of times in the way it works and how it reflects on each character in the story.
It's a gorgeous looking board, and I'll say maybe the publicist can send us, or you can send us, some really high resolution images up close to
Yeah,
take a look at it. I would love that. The did you now, as you've said, kind of your return to the horror genre, were there any old tricks that you wanted to bring back and play with again, or maybe stuff that you wanted to try before and were limited either by studios or technology or whatever it may have been that you get to now do?
Absolutely. This whole movie is really all about that. It was my opportunity to do anything and everything I wanted to do in the genre that I hadn't gotten to do yet. But I did bring back practical effects. I'm very confident with practical effects and live stunt work. So it takes a little while longer to prep them so they're safe, particularly because I wanted my principal cast, not stunt people doing these things. And fortunately for me, Madison Eisman is as brave as Arnold Schwarzenegger or Dwayne Johnson. She was ready for the action. It's not really a spoiler because there's a bit of it in the trailer. There's a scene in bed where these hands come up and grab her. All live. The whole bedroom and bathroom were built 8 feet in the air so I could do all these live effects. No shots were really separate. They were all done there that day with Madison. So lying in a bed with 19 puppeteers underneath the bed, each being able to only explode one hand up out of the bed. Uh, it came out even better than I thought, to be honest. And so there is CGI, but used very sparingly as a cleanup.
Yeah.
You know, you could tweak certain things in those shots. But Madison was great for take two, three, and four on a shot where she's lying in bed, just waiting for me to say action, and has no control as these live puppeteers are reaching up and really grabbing her hard. We did it in stages to make sure she was comfortable with it. So that's kind of a behind the scenes glimpse. I want people to enjoy the movie before they hear all my tricks. But that bed and the bathroom set are all what's happening all really happened. I think there's a bit in the trailer too. It's a bottomless tub
Hmm.
that she finally gets pulled down into, and that was live on the set also. So practical effects from my original with we were pioneers in CGI with the mask with just a few touches where we use the CGI to fix things up.
You are kind of avoiding the typical Hollywood model as far as funding and distribution and also involvement. And I know that you've gone from, Scorpio King to doing other films like so you're very nimble as a filmmaker, but seeing how this turns out, is this like, okay, this is the path for me now. I can do this and you know what, I get to maintain control and not have to deal with the BS.
It's not always BS. I've got friends at the studios. Mike DeLuca at Warner's is an old buddy who did the mask with me originally, and there are others. So I'm well supported when I do a studio film. The problem with the studio process is development. The term development hell, there's there for a reason. And I can be slowed down 3, 4 years and not get a green light on a film. And I overcommit to one film at a time, the way I work. I don't do, let's develop 3 films and we'll see which one happens. And that's kind of the way I am. This model works better for me because I'm in control of the pacing of the film. It's for sure going to get a green light if I'm doing rewrites because, we're the ones that have helped fund it. And I like to see film funding become more decentralized. There was a crypto element to how we funded this film through Gala Films, and it's an interesting way to think about that as a possible funding source in the future. This was for an independent film, it was a high-end budget, but it's way below what you see from any studio film, the cost of this film,
Yeah.
including the way that we're distributing it. So we'll see how it goes. We seem to have a lot of excitement about the film right now, but it is we're trying to do a new, more efficient model. Honestly, for I want my financiers to come out of this very well. My number one thing is pleasing audiences and seeing if I can do universal stories so it plays internationally. And then uplifting a cast, especially if I can give new cast members an opportunity, which we've done on this picture with Antonio Despa. Charlie Tahan's already a star from Ozark. He's great in this picture, by the way. Aaron Dominguez, it's I believe it's his first leading role. And as I've said, Jamie and Madison are already established. Watch out for Mel Johnson. She's amazing. So, it's exciting for me to be able to take a young cast up. So can I protect the financier's investment and hopefully uh, make us all a lot of money. That's the point of it from their point of view. Can I entertain the audiences? And am I finding new cast members to present to audiences where I can really bring them to their best work? That's what I look for.
Yeah. And it looks really good. It's an entertaining ride. So, and also let's face it, like the system is so broken right now that someone needs to be doing things differently. So, I feel like this should be a good way forward. I know we're running low on time, but I had to ask about New Orleans because I know you shot in Montreal, a little bit outside of Montreal, and then a lot of it in New Orleans. Talk about just the kind of the palpable magic of New Orleans and how that became a bit of its own character or a primer even for these performances and telling this story because you can't shoot New Orleans without New Orleans impacting you, it seems like.
Well, I agree, and this all comes from 5 days I was in New Orleans while one of my family members was in a hospital for a specialist there. It so happened, and I was there as a guardian, and being alone in New Orleans when you're not there on holiday, and because of my interests, I was in the back streets looking at the real voodoo shops and things like this that still exist there. There's plenty of tourist things, but New Orleans, the music, the food, and its association with witchcraft and voodoo runs very deep, and also very French, which was part of our story, was the French witch trials. It's all closely associated. So I thought if I'm going to do Witchboard, it's going to be really deep in the mythology and the real history of witches and Wicca, and that is New Orleans. So we use that atmosphere, that music, and the colors of New Orleans to enrich the story, and it did help the performances. It really did. That little magic spell that New Orleans has that I experienced on my own in those 5 days, I really realized there was a dark side to the city. Were part of my influence on Witchboard.
Do we have more to go with the Witchboard story? Do you have stories plotted out for sequels?
I can't stop, in my head, but we got to leave it to the audiences. Let's see how they respond to this first film. Based on some of the early screenings, it's a really terrific response. But there's already a Witchboard universe. Kevin
Right.
did 3 films back in the day, so he was happily very. I didn't know if he'd be upset with me because I don't feel restricted. I didn't do a remake. I used it as a platform to take the whole story further with all new characters and a pendulum board. He loved it. He realized we honored his original, and so he talks about the Witchboard universe, and I get it. I mean, it's a fascinating world. Magic is real. Your intentions can be manifest in Witchboard. Just be careful what you wish for.
And finally, before I let you go, tell me about, I know you grew up in Illinois. You've covered a lot of ground, but I'm always curious about the urban legends from someone's upbringing, like the creepy old house at the end of the block, things like that. Were there any great legends? Because let's face it, Ouija boards are part of our great urban legend fabric, it would say. So anything from where you grew up?
There was a monastery that some of the kids broke into, like they would break into a cemetery, and they came back with some pretty terrifying stories. I'm sure that was in their own imagination. I'm sure there were nice monks there outside of Chicago, and the kids were probably more frightening to the monks than the monks were to the kids. But that was the big urban legend back in the day. I won't go into it. Maybe there's a movie into it. So, and movie in it. So I won't go into the real darker details of that. But it's interesting you should say that. There definitely was that particular story around my high school, and of course other urban legends in Chicago.
I love it. Well, sir, it's a pleasure to talk with you. And honestly, I love talking to you specifically because I did love Nightmare on Elm Street. Dreamscape terrified me as a young child, and then someone that's so truly, obviously invested in sort of the material behind the fiction. I love that quite a bit. So this was a fun ride.
Oh, it's,
Chuck,
it's always, it's always more resonant if we can have a little bit of reality. The audience senses it.
yeah. Yeah, and I think you feel it in this. So yes, and I want to see up close pictures of this board. And at some point next time I see you, bring the board. I want to hold that baby.
Oh yeah, no. I'll take it on a tour when we're ready.
I love it. All right, Chuck. Thanks so much for your time and best of luck with the rollout of the movie of Witchboard.
Thanks for your insightful questions as usual.
Oh,
You know, it's
thank you.
good to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. It's great.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll take that compliment. All right. Be well, sir.
You too. Take care.
And there you have it. Chuck Russell, writer, director of Witchboard 2025, opens in theaters August 15th. How about that? Just so cool. First off, setting a movie involving the paranormal, involving the supernatural in New Orleans already, I'm down for that. But listening to Chuck talk about his own opinions about the paranormal, about witch boards, about spooky stuff that's out there, it's very cool. And he's just a delightful guy to talk to, and really, truly, and a guy that's been out there that's made such a mark on cinema. Like I said, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, as well as then The Mask, launching Jim Carrey into superstardom and making boatloads of money. But Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and Dreamscape, as I said. So do check that out. In fact, your homework, if I can give you homework, your homework is to not only go see Witchboard 2025 when it opens August 15th, but go watch the original Witchboard, written and directed by Kevin Tenney, and then also go watch Dreamscape. Maybe over on our Patreon, that's what we'll do. Maybe we'll watch Dreamscape and then maybe Witchboard too. So yeah, in fact, I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to set up some time to go to watch some of those movies as a movie watch live stream over on my Patreon. So join us over there. All right. Thanks again to Chuck for giving so much time and talking about his new film, Witchboard. I have such a blast talking to this man, and I hope you dug it as well. That's it for me. I'm Aaron Sagers. This has been Talking Strange. Until next time, friends, remember, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.